Hello, 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 soccer friends, and welcome back to the latest episode of the SoccerWire Podcast. I'm Charles Boehm with you today, along with my partners in soccer, who you'll hear from in just a moment. And we've got a spicy topic for today's episode. Today, we're going to try to tackle, or at least start to tackle, one of the hottest topics of debate in the youth soccer world that touches every corner of the landscape. Rankings.
Dun, dun, dun.
We're here in studio with SoccerWire founder Chris Hummer and our esteemed producer Bridget Baker. As you are listening to this, mere moments ago, SoccerWire released the first edition of a brand new monthly feature. You may have already seen it. Go to soccerwire.com if you've got a web browser in front of you right now. The top 100 youth soccer clubs in the United States, boys edition. In fact, we're recording this episode just minutes after our news editor Quinn Castile hit the publish button. So we may even reference some of the feedback here today as Bridget monitors the social world and any responses or feedback we get from you. But more on that in just a bit. Club rankings, team rankings, player rankings, final standings. Pick a measurement and you'll find it not only on youth soccer, but in some form or another in any sport, especially in America, where of course we are all insane about youth sports. But it's not all negative, folks. We're also going to get into the nuts and bolts of why this has gotten to be the way it is, how this happened, and how possibly, just maybe, we can start to move towards a better place, a more mutually beneficial outcome for the system as a whole. Whether you're a parent, a coach, a player involved in travel soccer, really starting at age 9, or if you're a tournament director trying to figure out what teams to accept, where to place them for your next event, the rankings of youth soccer teams has surely been discussed in your world at some point. Good, bad, or indifferent, rankings are part of the youth soccer culture here in the U.S. in a way that's really unique to the rest of the world. It's a topic that's been written about plenty, including many pieces on SoccerWire.com over the years by Chris and others. And I'm going to tee him up by simply saying, Chris, you are not a fan of youth soccer rankings.
Certainly not. Yes. This is one of it's been, I think some people have called it my white whale in a ways. And for those of you who've been following us for a long time, we even tried a spin-off website called Report a Score, which was trying to tackle this whole thing in another way.
I'm pouring out some of my coffee for Report a Score.
Yeah, exactly.
That
I still have the code somewhere on a hard drive. You never know. So, I just want to make a differentiator here that, there's a big difference between team rankings. So trying to take a team and what we've just done with the club rankings, which was in a way, the club rankings has become as a result as there just is no way to fairly, and in our world of I guess news media or trying to carry as much water as we can to educate the youth soccer marketplace, so they can make the best decisions about their own pathways and so forth. And for those of us that live in the sport every day, and with the additional exposure the national teams get, the conversation both from fans and participants in the youth soccer world these days has centered around how good are the national teams. Well, they're usually about as good as the youth national teams, and who feeds the youth national teams? Clubs or teams. So 30 years ago, it was team. And we've talked about this before in the podcast, professionalization of youth soccer, which means that you have basically businesses that are either for-profit or non-for-profit clubs that have full-time staff who are in charge of organizing their travel organization from top to bottom, identifying young players and moving them up as they should. So the clubs that can do that really well certainly will have, we think, a bunch of teams that are quote unquote ranked pretty well. So we just wanted to take a piece of the ranking world as a baseline, but then look at it editorially and from our own knowledge and people we talk to. Maybe we'll get feedback from people in the future, but also ranked a lot of different things as well to say what clubs appear to be, at least to us, developing players. And obviously, if you have good players, your teams are going to be good too. So rankings is part of that. I
want to unpack a couple aspects of this. First of all, I think we should address the fact that there's not even necessarily universal agreement on what a club is, right? And in a lot, we're going to talk about some of the incumbent rankings and some of the sort of vestiges of the old days where things were even more wilder than they are now, where there was no club. there was a team, maybe with a group of kids that were friends, or a coach that had a certain following or a cult of personality or whatever. And in some cases, we still see that what our clubs on paper are actually just sort of clusterings of teams that have banded together to save money on uniforms or logistics.
Or you
or
required, there was a time where actually not a time, it's this way now too. The leagues require, when there was a pecking order of elite leagues before we went sort of national and regional with these behemoths of leagues like ECNL and Development Academy and so forth, even regionally, the leagues, there weren't that many of them. So, and there seemed to be clear pecking orders. So rather than a league accepting one team or another, the leagues would accept a club. And then that club then had to prove that they had enough fields to field games. That made things easier. And then the teams would be able to enter into that league under that club's name. So that created a thing where the club is a necessary component of the structure of soccer. But now that things have become professionalized, it's even gotten worse. So you mentioned, I say worse from a keeping track of it all type of a way. So now in a lot of clubs, it's gone from not just there's this brand name like an umbrella that we use to advance our individual team goals, which is the way the world used to work when State Cup was literally everything in your state. As we were trying to put this ranking together, I mean, what we did as a baseline was we identified in the U13 through U19 age groups, and we're in the middle of doing this with the girls now, but we started with the boys, and we looked at, we took not GotSoccer, just out there. We can go into
more on them in a minute.
Yeah, more on that in a minute. But there's another ranking platform which sort of much more subjectively goes through all of the results. It just crawls the internet for results from hundreds and hundreds of websites, and at the very least, it's created a good, solid list of who the teams are, even though there's some duplicates in there. So we went through the top 100 of 13s, 14s, 15s, 16s, 17s, 18s, 19s, and pulled out the list of all those teams.
Just to be clear, those are age groups.
Yes. And then we had to say, oh, what club does this team belong to? So it was like, I mean, we went down some rabbit holes trying to figure out who some of these clubs were, period. I mean, some of them don't even have websites, and typically it'd be one team and one age group that had, that entered a top tournament and got a couple of good results against other good teams. So, but back to my point of the club world, now there's franchises, and Surf Rush, St. Louis Scott Gallagher was one of the first ones that was sort of a really strong club that they created a different club in a completely different state and called it the same thing. So there's
you've got mergers, you've got partnerships,
alliances. You can't keep track of it, let alone most of these clubs are not for profit, so they're probably affiliating, quote unquote, because you can't really merge not-for-profits easily. That's a whole nother ball. So again, it's way too much in the weeds, but that's the club world is always changing, always changing, and it always will. So a lot of the work that we did for this ranking was figuring out, do we have the right teams belonging to the right clubs? And I would imagine that we probably actually got one or two of them wrong, but more in that affiliate world, like, oh, that was, this club that's named this, but that's not actually, them. But it'll only be like one team out of all the teams, and the national team call-ups are pretty accurate. So any one team shouldn't skew where we came down on this list very much.
And I think there's this concept of a club-centric approach to development, to management, to play, and which ties into this language that we see most prominently maybe with U.S. club soccer, one of the biggest sanctioning and organizational bodies in the youth scene. It really owes their existence to this idea, right? And I think we should probably acknowledge that this is invariably there will be good teams and players, maybe who are not in these clubs who are left out of this. But I think you have the big picture, long-term goal of trying to elevate good actors, successful actors that have a sustainable methodology and infrastructure to replicate what they're doing, maybe not just for one season or a year or two, but or even a cycle, but
right,
long term.
Absolutely, and that makes me think of a sort of a common conversation that happens out in the travel soccer marketplace. a lot of times of those individual teams that you described that were just a team looking for a place to call home so they could enter a certain league, that's typically the landscape that looks like a coach who's a really passionate, it could be a good coach, but if you really dig in deep with real developers of players from Europe to the ones that are doing it well here in the US, there's usually not a model that sticking with a coach from the same coach when no other specialty coach is involved, hardly, from U9 all the way to U18 is a good thing. It's like everything else. You don't have the same teacher the whole way through for every subject, for every grade. So, it's sort of the logic test is you need to develop as a player, just like you need to develop as a human, to have lots of different touch points, lots of different influences, and take a little bit of the best, and that's how you make yourself unique. So, that's getting clubs that can do that is kind of what we're getting at. So now you're Johnny, 10-year-old who's really, really good, and you're the parent of Johnny 10-year-old, and he's your oldest child, and you played football growing up, or you didn't play sports at all, and you just don't know anything about this world, and they're winning everything, and he's scoring 5 goals a game, and it feels like, and you've got a coach that dresses well and is at the kids' love, and it feels so right. But then you start thinking about, how come I heard about this kid over here, and this kid went to the national team called them, and these sorts of things. And it becomes hard for a parent to understand or evaluate the rest of the world. So, most people say, get your kid in a good school that has a lot of good teachers across multiple subjects and a proven track record. This is what we're trying to do for soccer clubs, I think, is the best way to do it, is give people information that says, in addition to all the other PowerPoint bullet points that these clubs probably have at this point to try to recruit players in when they're younger, especially with MLS doing so well. Now NWSL teams have DA development academies and so forth. Should I really put my kid there or not? Not because of a brand or because of one coach, but because this club actually walks the talk about the buzzword player development pyramid. What does that really mean? Pathways is the biggest. It's a pathway. And that's what some of these affiliated clubs are meant to do. Is a pathway. FC Dallas is on our list. I'm sorry, they are on our list. They're number 1 on our list. Chicago Fire are in the top 10. They have a really neat model. They've got a ton of affiliate clubs, but they bring their teams together. We learned this doing this research, into their own event, and from that event, this isn't the DA teams, but the rest of the club, they sort of make a selection of the best players, and then they take those best players and they go play down at Disney. As a true sort of like almost their own little mini Chicago national team. And that's pretty cool. If more clubs, the MLS clubs, can invest and do that kind of stuff, that's a good pathway. But I would assume kids would eventually need to move to Chicago and play in their academy to continue that pathway. But if that pathway is there, then that makes a lot of sense. And
in these club rankings, you're looking at results inevitably, right? But the idea is also to factor in other data points. You mentioned the youth national teams. Can you talk about factoring individual accolades and performance sort of indicators versus team performance versus club performance?
We'll probably grow into the methodology. Again, it's really hard to do this sort of, not I want to say in secret, but until we had a starting point. What do? You almost can bias yourself by talking to. I'm not going to call the director of coaching at one of these clubs and ask them a bunch of questions and not talk to 200 other directors of coaching and ask them the same questions. That's not yet, but maybe we'll get there. So, we use youth national teams. We tested looking at college commitments as one criteria, and it was almost paralleling perfect how the teams did. So if you think about a club that has 4 or 5 Division I college commits, at U19, if you've got Division I level college commits, you're probably got a pretty strong team. So, and it just worked out that way. So sort of the diagram or the data scattering of where the college commits, because we have a big college commitment tracker on SoccerWire. So it was really easy for us to sort by club or by right there. And you would see the clubs that have the most college commitments are the clubs that are near the top of the list we already had in generally the same order. So we didn't want to, dig into that too much.
And listeners, we know that you're going to have specific questions,
Yeah.
especially if your team or club, your club is on these listings, is not on the listings, is
Right.
not in the place you think they should be in the listings. Yeah. We will have at least one future episode that's going to revolve around the nuts and bolts methodology here. In a sense, Chris, maybe it's unfair to call this a beta, but there's a little bit of a startup, I think, approach that you guys are taking to the information. You know that it's going to evolve once it's public and once it begins to become a regular feature, what looks like twice a month.
Yeah. Well, once a month per gender. And then we're thinking we'll do a year end where we're going to take a snapshot of each of the months that we do. So we didn't have those ranking numbers. And then at the end of the year, or maybe even a midsummer one, because there's like in July and August, there's not a lot of competitions going on other than the big national championships, which then become kind of a bellwether for that club, kind of a capstone for the year for them. So we're thinking, it wouldn't make sense to just run the rankings in December, let's say, and say, well, here's the clubs of the year in December. That's not how it'll work. So we'll probably take all of the other 11 months or 10 months, however we get to the end of this particular year, because we just started it, and average those numbers together and come up with a list. I also wanted to combine, like we started this thinking about just doing it once a month overall, but there are a lot of clubs that don't excel in one gender or the other, or don't even have one gender or the other than through these affiliates. So they're totally different coaching staffs, they're totally different facilities. So we really wanted to kind of keep it boys, girls, and give them each club their own focus. But clearly, even just looking at those lists next Wednesday when we release the girls, you're still going to, I'm telling you right now, you're still going to see FC Dallas probably in the top 10. Mm-hmm. They're just really strong on both sides. So, so national team players, we went through all the call-ups. We try to keep it to a year, and there are some players that we use that some clubs got credit for because they had a youth national team call-up 6 months ago, but those players actually are in other clubs now, today as we speak, but we still it's whatever the stamp was for the club when that player was named to that roster pool by U.S. Soccer. So we used that, but presumably the next time it comes out, if that player gets called back in, then the new club will shift that thing.
And I also want to emphasize here, we're only beginning, and really sort of hardcore users and true industry insiders will recognize the levels of complexity we're dealing with here. Mm-hmm. There's so many different factors. You have this enormous country with all these different leagues and levels of play and regional strengths and weaknesses, seasonal variations, right? We see big differences just in looking at one national league, ECNL. The calendars are weighted around the practical considerations of regions and states and individual.
Letting kids actually play high school.
Well, lo and behold, this is happening, right? And this could affect any attempt to create an objective ranking system. So there's another
reason we went club. I mean, it's just, you got to kind of balance it out a bit. Just to add to your point, not to cut you off, this is a good point. We had some Canadian clubs at first, not the Canadian soccer clubs in Canada. Like Toronto FC was right. I mean, they have DA teams that will pretty much on any given day will beat any other team in the country. And but because they don't have a whole bigger youth system that's U.S. heavy, and they don't have a lot of U.S. youth national team call-ups, they didn't appear sort of properly in the rankings. So they were up there. Vancouver was in there. Montreal was in there. But we, on the rough run through, but we just decided we're going to focus on the United States because there's just no way to. It just makes it exponentially more difficult to then look at the Canadian national team call-ups. Okay, but and we're a U.S.-based website whose mission is to educate and advance the game in the United States. So we thought about, okay, the MLS clubs should at least be in there, but then we took, it just wasn't sort of fair because it wasn't giving them enough. But then it was also confusing the message, so we took them out. But when we were looking at them, and this is true for some of the northern, Boston clubs right now, there's recency involved in the rankings, basically using as the baseline. So there's not a lot of recent games in the rankings for the teams that they're just not playing right now. Mm-hmm. So, but over the course of the year, that'll balance out.
Mm-hmm. The winter affected teams as we record now. For sure. And so, and you mentioned also the idea of national teamers. I'm sure you're going to have sample size is going to grow and evolve, I would think, in the
well,
days
the pools
and
get bigger.
months.
Yeah, the pools get bigger. There's a couple of our most consistently popular posts on SoccerWire as far as announcing news is concerned are rosters. That's just what it is. It's the same reason rankings are popular in every sport in the United States. Whether if you throw a pointy football, you want to see what football teams are ranked number one, no matter where you are. You just like, oh, I know it, whatever. So that's just the way it is. So we think it'll grow over time. What else that we look at? So the national team polls should grow, but some of these rosters that come out. So EC now has been doing this for the women, at least the girls' side, have been doing a national selection team. They've been doing it the last few events, and those roster announcements crush because they're kind of doing what we talked about a little bit with Chicago. Is they're looking at, okay, well,
best of the best.
Yeah, the best of the best. And the beautiful thing about these events is you have the coaches that are there, that are running these top clubs. They're good scouts. They know what they're looking at. So if they're the ones that are picking these players and saying ping, 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 ping,
coaching against them in many
yeah.
cases.
They just know. It's just they coach against them all the time. So it's so maybe we look at that. It's like anything else on a list. It doesn't matter whether you're rating restaurants for the end of the year, thing in a local food magazine. You usually get them in generally the right order, but the decisions become around the bubble. The decisions become, we looked at where did our ranking come in down to 120. And again, our formula, the raw formula we came up, we have across 7 age groups, just in boys, there's almost 600 clubs represented that we could tell. Some of those are some of those affiliate spinoffs. So let's just round it safely to 500 clubs. So by definition, there's 7 age groups. So there's lots of clubs that have multiple teams, and that's just pulling the top 100 or so. So we looked at, we do kind of, if you want to know where a certain club is, Texas, I guess, I don't know. I'll tell you where you are. I don't know, but it's there's big clumps of clubs just because the formula just didn't work well, and then we didn't editorially dig deeper on those. So.
And you mentioned editorial aspect. This is inherently has to have subjective data into it. You just mentioned
we
one
want it to
example
be
of the
there
selection
to
team.
a point.
I think we should address that topic because people tend to get suspicious. Everybody wants a purely and wholly objective set of data that we can all agree or come close to agreeing is immune to the human element. But that's impossible here, right? Because you're trying to overcome the limitations of a purely data-driven, result-driven model to include things like expertise as reflected in various selection decisions.
Yeah, what's the saying about statistics and damn statistics? It's if there were a perfect system, it would exist, and it would be very obvious, and everybody would know what college to go to, what team to go to, what club to go to, based on those things. You are never ever going to get a 100% accurate system through math alone. If for no other reason, because each person's definition of what accurate means is different. So you can use math to look at facts. And to that extent, that's where I was talking about. We needed to make sure there weren't duplicate teams being picked from this. And this was happening in the baseline ranking system we used just to get the game results to the starting point. The same teams are in there twice. It's obvious. And it's just because they were named something a little bit different and for that particular event. So the system that was crawling,
coaches, please use the same. Keep your lightning extreme black 03 very, very clear for us.
Yeah, but it gets harder. That's kind of true, but at the same time, you have clubs that are big that have multiple teams in the same age group, so you can't all be FC soccer.
And we know there's roster shuffling and, and
that's fine.
Playing up, and
that's fine to a point.
Yeah.
So yes, we had to. The subjectiveness to it has to be there, and who better to do it than people who live in the soccer world and write about that stuff every day. So, we've been covering the top leagues, the top clubs, for almost 14 years, really. We got into the meat of the national coverage stuff. We were there. I was in the room when ECNL was launched. I was a representative for a club that was in the founding group. I was at the development academy on the girls' side when it launched and launched 2 DAs. So, Quinn's been with us for, almost 7 or 8 maybe even going on 10 years since I first used him as an intern when he was still in college. And everybody that's been involved with SoccerWire with this process has been attending events, consuming youth soccer, knows a lot of the development coaches and so forth. So we didn't look at it and say, oh, well, we like this club, let's move them from 50 to 10. That's not where the conversations happen. The conversation, Barcelona is a good example. So the residency academy in Arizona, they don't have a bunch of teams, but their list of players that have gone pro recently is they like 3, 4, 5, every half season they sign a couple of players. And so, but they didn't have, I don't think, any teams that appeared there in our actual rankings, but we know that club is developing players. So we made sure that they were well represented and thought about, okay, where did they compete against other teams when they did play here or there, as an example. So we had to look at it because, it was more like we just tried to fix what was obviously not right. We didn't tweak or move things because of what we thought, would be favoritism or anything.
Well, and the idea, isn't it safe to say that the converse of saying, okay, we use subjective perspective to hone numbers, and numbers can help you process large numbers. I would hope that over time, and I would expect that the system will begin to process the expertise on a scale that begins to kind of...
If this does well, I could see us sort of forming a committee and having a conference call and putting out a list ahead of time. I mean, whatever you have to do, you have coaches polls, all these other types of stuff in college sports. So we had multiple iterations of the list. So we produced the raw list. We put it out to our group, a small group of people. We looked at it. We made editorial comments, and then we came up with a way to add that stuff, to add sort of math to the situation. So what we did is we remembered, okay, we think this club should be here, this club should be there, this club should be there. And then we made the adjustments to the formula and basically tested our theory, not because we were tweaking the formula. We said, let's add, so we added the youth national team player stuff in. We said, okay, well, how do we weight that? Like, what is it? Is having one call up as good as having a number one U15 team in the country, or is it worth, how does it go into the score? And we basically, just on our hypothesis of how should we test the formula, we were able to then, with variables in the formula, weight it properly. And in a sense, meaning proper was the clubs moved into the vicinity that we thought they should move. And these are the ones that were the outliers, the ones that are like, wait, it doesn't make any sense. Why is that club not here? So we adjusted some things, figured out some math behind it that didn't change the general order of things, but that weighted those things properly. And we did that 3 times with 3 different metrics. And then we still made a couple of moves editorial, but we're pretty much right there to where the math fits the 99 percentile of the list.
Got questions, got comments, got feedback? We imagine listeners probably do, especially once you've had time to digest the new ranking system on its launch today. news@thesoccerwire.com is the email address for you to know and love. Hit us up with your feedback. We understand you might not like what you see. If you want to get it off your chest, it's okay. We try to read every single one. Can't promise you that your particular gripe will be incorporated into the rankings. However, it is a conversation, as you've heard. It is an ongoing process. The idea here is to get to the most objective truth possible. And I think this is a great place for us to segue to get to some really good stuff here, Chris. Mm-hmm. Surely there are listeners saying, why do I need another ranking system? I like where I am in GotSoccer. GotSoccer is working good for me. Or, I hate GotSoccer, but it's a necessary evil, and I don't want to deal with any more necessary evils. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about this, Chris.
Well, sure. I mean, as a coach, I hate GotSoccer rankings. I just do. They are, from the pure perspective of where does a team fit in an age group, they're completely worthless. But you said necessary evil. They work really well as a platform to research how teams do against each other. And that's meaning that it's used for tournaments. The
head
tournament,
to head.
Yes. So, GotSoccer, they're brilliant marketers. They have a very solid tournament management platform, which is, you can't succeed in a marketplace like this. And I say that succeed meaning that I don't have, it's anecdotal numbers, but at least east of the Mississippi, they're probably running 80% of all the tournaments. If not, it could be something like 70, but it feels like it's 100% of all the tournaments.
And we know this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. Tournaments alone, travel tournaments specifically, are a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Add in all
within
the numbers,
within the even bigger landscape of elite youth soccer.
Yeah, this
in
is just
general.
soccer. Yeah. So I mean, there has to be a way. You're a tournament director, and it doesn't matter whether you don't have enough teams to enter. You have more capacity than teams that you have entering and paying you money. You still have to decide where those teams fit in your structure as far as your divisions. So GotSoccer is very helpful for that. You won't dig into those weeds, but you read some articles on it before. But for me, that rewards winning versus development on an individual basis, which should never be done. And it goes way too young. So earlier in the conversation I talked about, you're the dad of the really good U10 kid. It's the first thing that parents that are new to travel soccer can latch onto when they're young to measure whether they're in the right spot or not. And they talk about it at the dinner parties, and they talk about it with their friends who played soccer in college, at their poker parties or whatever.
Sidelines.
Yeah. And it's just like, it's so worthless.
U11.
Yeah.
U11 is
and at a time, one of my articles from a couple years ago, they did U10,
right.
And the world went bananas.
There was some.
I mean, Lexi Lawless was online. I remember that. So that was how I met Johnny O'Sullivan too. I wrote a hit piece about it, about how bad it was. I think it ended up on Soccer America or something, and he wrote one too. But it was just bad. So the reason it exists is it's a brilliant marketing move by GotSoccer. I wish they would change the formula for the rankings, but right now, if you want to use GotSoccer to manage your software, you have to have the teams apply for the tournament through their software, which creates a team account in their software, which means they know what team you are across all the events that you enter, which means they have the results. So they throw them all into their algorithm, which, to best of my knowledge, hasn't changed dramatically. They've tweaked it over the years, but it's still where it was the last time I looked. It's a weird system that it doesn't have it's math based because there's calculations involved, but it caps things. It favors teams that play more volume, I guess is the best way to do it, because more volume gives you more points, and the more points you have, the better you end up getting ranked when you play against other teams that have more points. So the more you play more teams that have more points, then the more points you get, versus you could play. This is why the DA doesn't hardly show up in there at all. Because they weren't using them to manage their software, but even ECNL teams were dropping off because they played less tournaments. It was
Chris, I want to drill down on this thing for just a minute. So if you were to follow the prescription that is laid down by U.S. Soccer and many other respected, overseas is a respected number of 4-1, right? Mm-hmm. Is it? If I remember correctly, offhand, the training to game ratio is around 4-1. I'm sure there's differences of opinion if you can get into the specifics, but if you're following that recommended ratio, which is what the DA is built around, you will not be maximizing your value within the GotSoccer system.
Well, yes. GotSoccer does have some leagues in it, and they actually have a development academy section now where it looks like they're just trying to mirror the results, probably to try and get those in. But for example, we looked at GotSoccer rankings when we first started hypothesizing this whole club ranking thing. And there's a big regional club in the Southwest, Arizona, Utah area, New Mexico area. And all these teams are showing up from Arizona, that are really highly ranked. And it's because their league is using the software. So it's plowing in all kinds of, and they're playing each other over and over again. And they're building up their own points, but they're not getting tested from the outside world, if you will. So it's just, the formula is not right. It just
it can be gamed, right? We know that's
it can be
that
gamed,
happens.
quote unquote gamed. Again, I don't want to get into liable issues, so I mean, these are all my opinions about from observation.
Shall we say maximized? Is that a better
You can game. Look, the way GotSoccer gets. Look at the rankings at U11 teams and see how many total points they have. The ones at the top, they're like 30,000. They're way up there in total GotSoccer points. And then you go to a U17 team and look at the top, and they're way less points. So what that means is the sooner you get in GotSoccer and start playing GotSoccer tournaments when you're young, in single digits even, because I think they still use results they just don't publish them. So they still know where the teams are. But the sooner you get, even if it's not single digits, if it's U11 or whatever, the sooner you get in the system, the sooner you get ranked high. And then as soon as another team plays the surf, there's like a July tournament that plays every year that's big and has it's like the first ever travel tournament for most of the teams in California, right? And from that very first event, they start with almost raw. So the team that wins that event gets 25,000 points or something like that. And so then the next time that team plays and you're in a team that plays against that team, then you get and you beat them because you've always been better than them, but they just happen to go to this other event. And then you have a bunch of points. And now you're getting accepted to all kinds of tournaments because other teams, so you can quote unquote game it by playing early and often in GotSoccer events where you can place well. And once you kind of get that momentum, it's a self-fulfilling thing. Now, those points drop off over time, and which is why you start looking at the older age groups, it starts to get a little bit less extreme. But it's more the formula. It's capped. They give points literally just for a win, the same points. Maybe they've taken it off, but they were giving 30 points at some point just to win. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter if you won Division 5 of the worst tournament in the country, or against a game, or you beat the national champion at the Jefferson Cup or Surf Cup or Dallas Cup. You get the same, quote unquote, a win was the same points. Now, if you won at the Dallas Cup, you probably beat another really good team. You got a bunch of points for that, but they give you points based on your final standings, not on your individual game results necessarily. So it's just, I wish they would just use a different formula.
It sounds like a noise in the algorithm,
Yeah.
noise prone.
Yeah. And the biggest thing of all is if you're not, you can't put results in for events that aren't using them to manage your software. So by definition, it excludes which is why the DA and the ECNL teams aren't in there for their league play, because they predominantly play league. And
the Federation has their own platform for those results.
ECNL has their own platform. Now ECNL teams do go play in other events, but not nearly at the quantity that other
the calendar doesn't allow it.
Right. So I didn't want to go. We could again talk all day.
Future episode.
Future
episode, guys.
It's just team rankings versus club rankings. Totally different. We use team rankings to get a baseline. We didn't use GotSoccer. We used the other platform that is actually sort of, crawls the entire internet to the best of their ability and just gets scores from all the platforms. And it's certainly a lot more accurate.
Folks, thanks for sticking with us here. Mm-hmm. As we've mentioned, there's so many different cul-de-sacs and alleys and throughways that we can get into. And rest assured, there is time and there will be opportunities to
discuss some of it doesn't even matter. It's just the people, geeks like us, that live in it every day. When you're a parent or a coach out in the field on Sunday, all of this is meaningless. It really is. We just want to help educate the market. We want to reward people that are running these clubs, quote unquote, the right way. Before we wind down, you had mentioned even like U.S. Club Soccer. Kevin Payne's been doing a great job down there to transition from the professional game to youth organization. He's a master at sort of setting goals and achieving them. And we're really interested in seeing this players first thing that U.S. Club Soccer is doing. Which is really interesting. You become a member, but almost none of the clubs that are, in that players first thing, at least today, are anywhere in our rankings. So it's one of these things that I'm really excited to see if it's marketing fluff or if it's actual meat, where they're digging in with their member clubs and they're saying, look, here's our philosophy on how you should structure yourself to be a good club top to bottom. And if you do that, you will start to see results. And obviously it takes time. It has to bake, right? So I'd be really, the idea, great. Somebody other than U.S. Soccer who are not involved in, they're not incentivized to make clubs good. U.S. Club Soccer is. By at least all appearances. So I'm really excited about that. But just I wanted to bring that up, is that idea of what is a club doing to improve their environment is what we're going for here. And obviously we have to start somewhere. We can't, do the whole country and go visit all the clubs and have surveys. That's not what we're trying to do. So we just picked the top 100.
Listeners, as you can hear, this is a new process with space for new data points to be added down the line. I think it sounds like there's a hope for a plan for flexibility and evolution. But first steps, what are your first impressions? Let us know. news@thesoccerwire.com. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, most or all of your favorite platforms, Insta as well. Hit us up, comments, tweets, whatever it is you've got. Let's start this conversation. Let's advance the wider conversation and see where this takes us.
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, we're probably all over social with some of this stuff. We're going to be putting out lists in chunks of 10, I think, and 20 of the clubs. So if your club is on there, give us that like and the reshare, and definitely follow us and then DM us back. Your thoughts. And we're not married to the system. What I'm married to is shining a light on the clubs that are doing things right. And by doing things right, I mean they're producing top-notch players that are they're ready to compete on the international stage eventually.
Thank you so much for joining us today, folks. Again, this is not the end of the conversation. This is just the start. This has been a decade-plus white whale, as Chris called it, for those here at SoccerWire, eager to promote great player development, eager to cast a positive light on influencers and experts who are doing good work in the field. So hit us back. Let us know what you like, what you don't like, suggestions, comments, etc. And let's see where this goes. Thanks so much for listening to this week's episode. See you next time.